Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and it's Warhammer Day today, which means there's going to be a bunch of fun reveals for the tabletop. But not only that, there's a bunch of news that's been dropping for the video games of Warhammer, and also they're on sale. You know, why not pick up a game at a very discounted rate? And it's the perfect time for me to do one of these videos for this year, so let's talk about Warhammer video games. Some of them have been great, some of them have been outright awful, but there's a lot of different types of Warhammer games out there, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about Warhammer video games that you should play during these last few months of 2024. Keep in mind that this is a Steam edition. But before anything, a big thank you to our sponsor, Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming is a platform where you'll be able to get more discounts for your video games, meaning that you can get a bunch more games at a cheaper rate. This also includes newly released titles like, for example, Space Marine 2, Frostpunk 2, and the brand new DLC for CK3 Roads to Power, which I have been enjoying immensely. And if you're here for Warhammer games, well, yeah, Instant Gaming has pretty much all of them at a pretty discounted rate, and the great thing is that they're always on sale. This also includes DLCs, and if you decide to make a purchase using my special link in the description below, it supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which is pretty great. I use Instant Gaming myself and quite enjoy them as a platform. Not only that, but we do have a monthly rolling giveaway with Instant Gaming in the description below. Win a game of your choice, so anything that might tickle your fancy doesn't have to be a Warhammer game, it could be literally anything else. A big thank you to our partners at Instant Gaming, and now let's return to our regularly scheduled content. Okay, we're going to start off with Gladius Relics of War. This is the game that scratches the civilization itch if you're looking for something like that, but also in the 41st millennium. Gladius released back in 2018, but is still a very much active title, receiving around 2 DLCs a year, usually in the form of a units pack and also a race pack, and it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon, meaning that if you're looking for an active title, you're buying into one. And the way that this game works is essentially just like Civ. It's hex-based game, hex-based combat, but you're able to play with the 41st Millennium in a map that you're going to be able to generate yourself. It's still very much random, but allows you to have a lot of freedom there, deciding on what enemies you're going to be fighting against, who's teaming up with who. There's a bunch of playable races already, like the Necrons, the Tau, and so on, with the DLC coming out at the final part of 2024, focusing around the Primaris to further boost up your Space Marine legions. As this game came out during the last parts of the Firstborn when it came to the tabletop, which means yes, you still have a bunch of Firstborn Marines to play around with if you've missed them. The game feels great. I wouldn't say it's as complex as the Civilization series, a little bit less so, but it is very, very good to scratch that itch if you like empire building titles. It's turn-based, keep that in mind. There's going to be a lot of turn-based titles, as you can imagine, considering that this is a Warhammer series. But it plays extremely well, very, very fluid, and the multiplayer is actually quite decent too if you decide to play around with friends, because you can have a decent amount of people playing and just causing some absolute havoc. Every faction has its own unique mechanics and its own style of play. The Space Marines, for example, only have one major settlement, that's a fortress monastery, but if you're playing as, say, the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, you are swarming and building loads and loads of settlements. The Necrons can only build on actual tombs, and the Tyranids just basically start eating through the world. I've dropped a bunch of hours on this title. It's very, very fun for casual play, and it's definitely something that I keep an eye on with each passing DLC. Alright, we're going to talk about another game from the same publisher, a turn-based title, but kind of different. See, this is Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, a turn-based title which focuses on bringing your tabletop armies into a 1v1 setting. There is a lot to do in Battlesector. It started off with one of the best campaign intros I've ever seen for a Warhammer game, and I'm not even kidding when I say that, as it focuses around the desolation of Baal, and my god, it's so good. The gameplay is pretty simple. You'll be building up army lists and you'll have a point limit. Your enemy will also have a point limit, and yeah, you can actually just duke it out. There is a skirmish mode, there's a multiplayer mode, there's a pretty good campaign which goes under a lot of lore, and there is a rather small, but it might be upgraded in the future, sandbox campaign, which features 2 enemy factions, yourself, and then the random enemies that you'll be seeing as you start taking over tiles. Think of this kind of like Mighty Empires in a sense, which I think is quite nice. Overall, this game is great. The model detail on each of the units is amazing. There's a lot of love put in from the developers to make sure that the miniatures are faithfully recreated in this video game. Gameplay is very fluid. DLCs are added every single year, so it is another active title, and that's important because a lot of Warhammer games get released and then just get quickly abandoned. It originally launched with Space Marines and Tyranids, but a bunch of races have been implemented, such as the Sisters of Battle, the Orcs, the Necrons, and very soon the release of the Astra Militarum. There's a lot to play around with. It's quite structured. You have different weapon options, so your Primaris Intercessor, for example, has a bunch of different bolters. It's not a very expensive title either, neither is the DLC, so it's pretty cheap to jump into. This next game, I wasn't too sure if I was going to talk about it, considering that while during the early access period and shortly after launch, this game was absolutely awesome. It did feel like it was getting quietly abandoned. However, it does seem that very recently, the developers, Fat Shark, have decided to go back to it and really give it a push. A new map has recently been released and a complete overhaul system to the itemization system. Yes, this is Warhammer 40,000 Darktide. And it's pretty simple to talk about. It's basically, if you want Left 4 Dead but in the 41st millennium, it's definitely something that you're going to want to play. Lots of shooting, playing in groups of 4 players, a number of different classes, with the class system being focused on a talent tree, meaning that you could have 4 of the same type of class, let's say Veteran for example, and each of them playing rather differently while still keeping in the same framework and keeping as lore-friendly as possible. I'd still say get this game discounted as much as you can, because it's still got a bit of a way to go, but it's one of these games that I really want to love. During the early access period, for example, I spent so much time playing it, I completely spaced out and did a 14-hour stream without pretty much realizing. The gunplay feels incredibly good, and if Fat Shark have finally pulled the finger out and have dedicated their time to working on making this game the best possible, it'll rank as one of the best Warhammer games of all time. Thanks to the recent updates, I am willing to give them a chance. Don't worry, Warhammer Fantasy fans, I got you. We can't talk about Darktide without talking about Vermintide. Yes, Vermintide 2 released 6 years ago and is still getting consistent updates, and it looks like finally, after many years, we're going to get the Versus mode that everyone had been waiting for, as there have been some closed tests and open tests for a decent amount of time now. Just like Darktide, this is a 4-player game, but it focuses around being in the Warhammer Fantasy setting during the end times, meaning that you're going to be fighting Chaos Warriors, you're going to be fighting Beastmen, you're going to be fighting Skaven, and more Skaven. There's a number of different playable characters, as you're going to be focusing on singular characters here, but each of them have a bunch of different subclasses, meaning that if you play as the Dwarf, you could end up being as a unarmed but very killy Slayer, or you could end up as an Engineer. So there's a lot of different playstyles for each of the individual characters. Again, it's a playstyle that focuses on a very Left 4 Dead format, which is absolutely awesome when you're fighting a horde of Skaven, clan rats, Skaven slaves, storm vermin even appear. There's so many things, even end times exclusive units like, say, for example, the Storm Fiend. As you start playing through the game, you'll be learning a lot about the lore of the end times, especially on how much it was a mistake from Games Workshop's part, but hey, that's neither here nor there. But if you want a game that you just want to hack and slash your way through hordes of enemies and you want it in the Warhammer setting, I'd say that Vermintide's probably better than Darktide at the moment. Both of them are pretty good in their own right, but Vermintide getting so much love as it has over the years makes it stand as one of the greatest video games that we've had for the Warhammer setting. Inquisitor Martyr is an action role-playing game set in the 41st millennium, so if you like games such as Path of Exile, Diablo, that's a very famous one, you're gonna like this. Gunplay feels very, very good. There's a lot to do here. Itemization feels incredible. It's still getting updates every now and then. New content such as new classes are still consistently coming out, and really there's a lot of love that the developers have actually put into this title. I tried this game out for the first time a small while back, and I was absolutely enthralled. There's a lot of detail in the enemy models, even though you're in a top-down point of view, and there's a lot, and I mean an absolute lot of varied enemies. Unlike other titles that we've seen with this, where they tend to reuse a lot of the same rig and animations, everything feels very fluid. Sure, there's a few reusing here and there, but in the most cases, everything feels incredibly unique. Honestly, my only gripe is that things aren't coming out fast enough, and that's not saying that there's not enough to do. It's more that I'm blasting through the content, I'm really enjoying playing it. It's a fault of mine where I hyper-focus onto a specific title and I just want more and more. So this is the first free-to-play and possibly the only free-to-play game that we'll be talking about this video, but this released fairly recently, Speed Freeks. It's a game where you're going to be playing as a orc in a Twisted Metal from back in the day. It's essentially that, but in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and oh my god, it's very, very fun. Because it is just pretty weird in a fun way. It's very much like, say for example, Twisted Metal, like I said, a little bit of Gorka Morka here and there. You remember that old tabletop system that Games Workshop released and then quietly got rid of? It's a shame that this game didn't get the attention it deserves. Now, I must admit, yes, there are monetization practices over here, but I don't feel like you need to spend money unless you absolutely want to or have to. It's pretty damn good. It's a shame that this is not getting more public knowledge all over the place, because it does seem like the devs are very interested in Warhammer lore, Warhammer tabletop, and it's very obvious when you see just how each of the cars work, the tanks and so on. There's a lot of variety, there's a decent amount of missions at the moment, but not a lot. I imagine that this game will get more love depending on how much support it gets and how many players it gets. Because right now it's not doing so well, but I must admit, when this was originally shown back in Skulls, I believe a year or two back, it was very, very fun to play, and I have been playing every now and then when I've had some free time and I just wanted to get a quick 15 to 20 minute match, you know? We're going to keep on to the orcs at the moment because we're going to talk about Shootas, Blood and Teef, a game in the Warhammer setting that I didn't know we actually needed. This is an old school side-scroller type game, but based with the orcs, where you're essentially just being an orc. Killing enemies, getting upgrades. If you're around my age, 30 plus, yeah, you might remember going to the arcade after school, playing a lot of side-scrollers, sometimes in a co-op basis, which this game does actually have co-op. It was a good time, right? It was a good time in the childhood. And you can get that here, but in the 41st millennium, playing as an orc, warring about. There is a phenomenal soundtrack to this game too, where it's just completely silly. This game doesn't try to make itself serious. This game just tries to go into the orcs mentality where, yeah, remember early 5th, 6th edition, 7th edition, where 40k wasn't really trying to take itself seriously, and there was a few little jokes here and there, while still being a grim dark setting. Well, yeah, that's what you're going to get here. It's definitely something that you're going to want to play. If you just want a casual side-scroller, it can get a little tough. I must admit, it can get a little tough, but it's really, really fun. If you ask Warhammer fans about some of the best Warhammer video games to ever release, you'll mostly hear about Mechanicus. And that's something that is so true that it's actually spawned a sequel. We don't know exactly when that's coming out yet, but many, many people are wildly excited, myself included. So yeah, another turn-based game, but I think most people don't even care when it comes to Mechanicus. It's got a bunch of really good combat systems. The skill system is pretty good. Progression works incredibly well. And not only that, but the soundtrack is banging, and I mean freaking banging. Actually, most lore YouTubers that you'll watch that do 40k stuff are using the Mechanicus soundtrack. But yeah, it's a great game. It's definitely something that you're going to want to check out. It can vary in terms of difficulty, it's very XCOM-y, but it's a gem, and it definitely needs to be explored by the fanbase as much as possible. We can't talk about Warhammer games and not talk about the most recent release, Space Marine 2, an absolutely phenomenal sequel to the much acclaimed Space Marine 1. This is a game that, good God, man, I had high hopes for. I was worried about 2, because obviously there had been some drama with former developers and everything, but it ended up being just a sequel. That's the big thing. It's a sequel. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Sure, they added new systems like co-op and stuff like that, but the idea is it's supposed to feel like Space Marine and then just add to it, which is very, very important because developers have this issue of going, yeah, let's take about it and then just completely fundamentally change everything that we know about this title. Obviously, you know, cough cough, Dawn of War 3, which broke hearts of Warhammer fans across the globe simultaneously. So it's great to see this. Not only that, but it's got a great campaign. It's got a very good operation system that looks like it's going to be expanded as it progresses. The PvP is good. The cosmetic system is good. Sure, there's a few DLC cosmetics and stuff, but I feel it's worth it to support the developers who are passionate enough to make a game that is likely going to stand the test of time. If we're going to have to wait another 10 years for another sequel, you know, it's going to be goddamn good. And this one has ended up being a monumental success. Very well done to Saber Interactive. They do deserve a lot of love. The developers have been very open and transparent. There is a roadmap and everything. This is going to be a good time for everyone who loves 40k, who loves Space Marines, and yeah, let's hope that it just continues. I would also highly recommend that if you are interested in the lore, then going back and playing Space Marine 1. It's held up very, very well, actually. I was playing it before Space Marine 2 Early Access, and it's just nice to know the story of Titus. Not only that, but again, it plays stupidly well in this day and age. Alright, we're going to talk about Dawn of War now, because, well, you know, there's been a lot of rumors lately that Dawn of War is going to get a remake that's been very much not sure if it's going to happen or not, considering that Relic has recently been acquired by Crypto Bros, but it might have been that the IP has been sent to a different studio as Games Workshop decide who makes the sequel or not. But the first Dawn of War and its 3 expansions, this being Winter Assault, Dark Crusade, and Soulstorm, are absolutely amazing, especially as, you know, that type of RTS game has been lost to the world lately. They hold up incredibly well for what they are. Yes, they are a little bit dated, keep that in mind. Yet the modding scene is keeping it alive by adding a lot more content, new factions, just a lot of new units. I mean, seriously, there is so much happening with the modding scene. You can find it on ModDB. This game is universally loved, and it's one of these titles that it's a shame it got butchered by its original devs purely because of greed. And Sega was involved too, remember that? Very topical, because obviously we've been dealing with that with other titles too. Despite the radical change that Dawn of War 2 had from Dawn of War 1, I would still recommend it because 1, the story was pretty decent, 2, it turned into a squad-based type of game instead, and 3, it had some RPG mechanics which were quite interesting. It had a few expansions which added a few different races. There was campaigns for the Tyranids, for the Sisters of Battle, for the Imperial Guard, for the Space Marines. It was pretty good. It should have been titled something else or be an extension of it and not Dawn of War 2. That being said, it plays very, very well. It's got a lot of really fun stuff. The campaign, where you can basically decide who actually falls to chaos, whilst the Blood Ravens are using some heretical stuff, is really fun, and it goes into some really darker aspects of the lore. It's also the case that this is the final Dawn of War game. Dawn of War 3... I mean, it exists, but not really, right? But this game, unfortunately, was a bit of the mark of the downturn, where Relic started basically shooting themselves in the foot constantly, because you don't have to remake the wheel all the time. Sometimes people just want a sequel. That's why Companies of Heroes didn't do too well, and that's why Dawn of War 3 was such a big problem. Okay, I guess you guys were not expecting this one, because we're going to talk about a private server. Yes! Return of Reckoning, also known as Warhammer Online. Now, this one isn't a Steam game, I must admit. Yes, it's a little bit lying here, but it's one of those games that needs to be talked about, because Warhammer Online has been kept alive by the fanbase and has been absolutely instrumental of keeping the flame of Warhammer Fantasy burning. The devs are very passionate, even adding new content or finishing up old content that was in the code and never finished up by Mythic and the other companies involved, and they've been given a go-ahead that they can actually continue without a problem. Games Workshop gave them the seal of approval, as, yeah, it's abandonware, nothing can really be done about that. So, yeah, there's even Twitch drops, which is absolutely amazing when it comes to that, because no other server, no other private server for any game has Twitch drops. The community's nice, the PvP is bustling, and really, again, if you missed the old one, right, you know, this came around the time of Wrath of the Lich King, this is something that you're going to want to play. Now, we can't talk about Warhammer unless we talk about my absolute favorite game of all time. Total War Warhammer is the recreation of Warhammer Fantasy, and has been the reason, one of the big reasons at least, as to why we saw the return of Warhammer Fantasy in the world of Warhammer the Old World. Almost all the factions from the tabletop are currently playable. This has been an 8-year saga of constant DLCs. There's been updates, there's been drama, and there's been good times. This was a big reason why I got back into the tabletop. I quit after the end times, but Total War Warhammer brought me back in. This is a game that I can spend hours and hours on it. It's why most of my channel is me talking about this title, where I can easily put in 40 hours a week just playing the game. And it's amazing. There's definitely been some rough times, but there's been some good times coming in. We've had recently Thrones of Decay, which is what is playing on screen right now. an absolutely phenomenal DLC, some good updates after that, and there's DLC on the way. There's so much more that can be added to this game series, and it's likely that Creative Assembly will keep supporting this, knowing that this is very much what's keeping the lights on for them too. It's their only active title at the time of recording this video. Keep in mind that this series is quite expensive. There's 3 base games and a bunch of races, but there's so much to play with. Get in with Game Free, start expanding from there. Keep in mind that there's a lot of sales for Total War. There's one currently happening at the time of this video, and in my instant gaming link in the description below has a bunch of discounts always when it comes to the Total War titles. So make sure you jump in at a cheaper way, because yeah, it'll cost you about the same as an army of tabletop at this rate. However, the enjoyment is there. I'm closing into, what, 10,000 hours on Warhammer 3, and yeah. Obviously, we have to talk about Boltgun, because, yeah, who doesn't want a 90s boomer shooter? I originally kind of laughed when I saw this reveal a few years back, and then I got to play it, and I realized, goddamn, this is really good. Because you know what? When a 90s boomer shooter comes out, it shows that a game doesn't have to be fancy graphics and all this type of stuff. It just has to be a good game. And this is a good game. It's had DLC since then, with a little bit of an expansion pack, and it looks like it's going to keep getting support. It's nice to see devs which are passionate about making a title which is just good. There's no big overextending, we're going to revolutionize everything. It's literally just, we're going to make a good game, and that's how it is. If you're fans of like Doom, Quake, all those old style games, you're going to love this one. It's definitely one to play. Now, I wanted to leave one specific one till last because it's an honorable mention, and it is abandonware because the devs abandoned the title as quickly as possible. This is Mordheim City of the Damned, an absolutely fantastic game for what it was. It's buggy, I must admit, but it's very difficult, and it reminds me of the Warhammer tabletop version of Mordheim. The problem here is that it got abandoned because the devs are spineless money chasers. They abandoned this one very quickly to work on Necromunda, and they abandoned that one too. Yeah. Fun. But it still stands as one of my favorite games despite being buggy, because I like a challenge, and it is very, very challenging. I'm hoping and praying to the dark gods that one day someone will take up the Mordheim IP and do it justice. Absolute justice. Because it's a game series that could work very well. It's simple. Squad versus squad. Have multiple squads in. Capture Warpstone. Try and take that back. Kill each other. It's so basic, but it's such a good system. People miss Mordheim on the tabletop. People miss Mordheim on the video games. If you're going to pick this up, get it on a sale. Get it as cheap as possible. Actually, let me just check very quickly. You can get it for 99p on Instant Gaming, which is absolutely amazing. Yeah, that's a great price. The campaign is difficult. There's some DLCs there too, by the way, which adds in some extra factions, which is heavily discounted, but it's definitely worth it if you want a challenging title. Honestly, once I have some free time coming up, I'm going to start bringing back Mordheim Mondays again on the streams, because I've missed it. I've been talking about it on stream a lot, and it's definitely one of those things that I want to do again. But with all that being said, I tried to talk about as many games as possible. There's a little bit of a time limit because obviously Warhammer Day is fastly approaching. Well, it is today by the time that this video goes out. There's a lot of good games out there. There's a lot of garbage games out there, but there's a lot of good games out there. There's other games that I haven't spoken about, say, for example, Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, but we don't know exactly what's going on with them, if there's more content to come, or if it's just going radio silent. Unfortunately, Frontier was hit by very heavy layoffs, which could impact the future of that title too. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.